Philosophy is often criticized by introductory students for being too abstract or too theoretical, essentially for not having any real-world connections whatsoever. I'm certainly sympathetic with those criticisms. After all, you might be sitting in class today as a finance major, or business major, accounting major, whatever the case may be, wondering what exactly philosophy has to do with the real world. Simply put, how can philosophy make you money? After all, it's a subject studied in the liberal arts. And how does this exactly transfer to a potential career, into some sort of livelihood? After all, you'll presumably be saddled with all sorts of student loans. And it just seems to be a dominant part of fact that you'll have to make a certain amount of money. And how does studying philosophy play into that? Essentially, philosophy is a major in critical thinking and problem solving and abstract reasoning. Really, philosophy seems to be the ultimate transferable skill that is directly applicable to whatever it is that you might be studying, and perhaps more importantly, to life in general. Of course, that all sounds well and good, that you'll get a major in critical thinking and problem solving and reasoning. But what do these terms exactly mean? What do they have to do with the real world, the so-called real world that's out there somewhere? Again, more specifically, how does this translate into making money? So for today's lecture, just as kind of a brief introduction to philosophy in general, I've offered here on the board 5 simple steps to retiring with $1 million. A philosopher's guide to making $1 million. So we'll just work our way through these step by step, go over some of the major points in the history of philosophy. After all, it's not uncommon to consult philosophers for some of life's most pressing issues, such as, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of all of this? Why do I exist at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? So why not consult philosophers as well when it comes to monetary concepts, things dealing with money? And see what lessons we might be able to draw. So to start things off, we'll examine first a Scottish philosopher by the name of David Hume, who lived in the 1700s, 1711 to 1776. David Hume is probably most famous not for resolving any sorts of philosophical issues, but rather for introducing a problem, which is generally referred to as Hume's problem of induction. Which is something that we'll certainly come back to later on in the semester. And in fact, we'll devote a majority of a class period to Hume's problem of induction. But the problem simply states that just because things have occurred in a certain way in the past, that's no guarantee whatsoever. It doesn't logically imply, you might say, to use a bit of fancy jargon, that things will continue that way into the future. What does this have to do with making $1 million? If we were to translate Hume's advice, Hume's problem of induction here, into economics, we might say something like, because the future isn't guaranteed, even though things might be all well and good now, you might run into unforeseen problems in the near future. So as a basic principle here, it's good to plan for the future. It's good to save for the future. Any good financial advisor will suggest that you save upwards of 10% of your income. Given that the future is uncertain, it seems necessary to plan for this future. From philosophy, we get a good bit of practical advice. Step number 2, Occam's razor. Again, this is something that we'll return to later on in the semester. Comes from a guy by the name of William of Occam, thus the name Occam's razor. And Occam's razor was put forth kind of as a reaction to rationalism by the empiricists. These are a couple of terms that you might not be familiar with just yet, but it will come as the course progresses: rationalism, empiricism. In any case, Occam's razor holds that we ought not to multiply entities beyond necessity. And I realize that that's quite a mouthful here for the first day of class. We need not multiply entities beyond necessity. We ought to do away with excessive ontological baggage, in other words, more fancy jargon here. But before we get out of here, at the end of the semester, you'll have a good grapple on these fancy terms like ontological. So Occam's razor, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. So how might we translate this into financial terms? Good sound advice seems to be simplify your life as much as possible. After all, oftentimes the things we own in the long run end up owning us. That's something to think about for a bit. The things that we own in the long run end up owning us. To simplify your life as much as possible. So that's step number 2. Step number 3 comes to us from logic. It's called a red herring, which in fact is a logical fallacy. or in other words, is an error in reasoning, a logical fallacy. Another main branch of philosophy is called logic.